talking about the difference. I'm not sure. Osvav. The difference between tzedakah and chesed. And we said tzedakah is filling a lack. Chesed is giving more than is necessary, more than you ever were lacking. And when it comes to chasidecha yivarachucha, which means yivarachu ko, that the chassid can bring down hamshacha into malchus, there's two different types of hamshacha that come into malchus. Since malchus is responsible for creating the world, and when she created the world, she had to go into a state of tzimtzum, and like we said, when you're a mashpia, you can't simultaneously be a makabel. So ata asisas hashamayim, you had, when you made the heavens, it was ata minus a hey. We said yesterday, at. It's written. We say it ata, but we write it at because 5 partsufim were taken away from her when she turned from makabel to mashpia in order to create the world, and therefore when she'll wind up being drawn down a bracha from Hashem, even after the worlds are created, called tzedakah, he fills her lack. He'll replace those 5 partsufim that were lacking from her, which the 5 partsufim are Keser, Chochmah, Bina, Za, Malchus, Za and Nukva. And we said that, so what's left is Chitzonius of Malchus, which is Malchus of Malchus. Just reviewing from yesterday, yeah? Remembering this?
Yeah.
Any questions? Yeah.
I was actually talking to somebody about this, and they asked a good question. I thought, I don't know if it's a question you're going to necessarily ask, but they said like, why didn't Hashem just make Malchus in a way where it didn't like anything when he gives over the world? Like why did Hashem make that like that? Like
She would never have known riches.
Then
we did say that, yeah. But there's also we discussed this before, which is just that if the origin of the world was not already in a state of total bittul, then after the world would have been created, it would never have been able to arrive back at that level of bittul. In short, what we're saying is that if Hashem would have just created Malchus, Sheba Malchus, and the world as is, there's a whole long mimer about this. We learned it together at least once, but I mean it's been a long time, so I'll let you off the hook there. But if you would have just created the world, so to speak, popped out as is, and not as a first existing inside of a bigger klal, and then removing the prat from the klal, right? You with me?
Yeah.
Then there would have never been a potentiality for the prat, the malchus sheba malchus, to ever experience the klal back into herself later, because finite cannot experience infinite.
Right.
But if the finite began inside of something infinite,
right,
then even after it comes out, it still has that feeling of infinite. So when the infinite comes to reconnect with her, to marry her again, then it will be able to be accepted. It's called a hachshara. It's like kashered in the Or Ein Sof, so that when the Or Ein Sof comes to return with it, it can have room for it. It knows that bittul. It already was there. It began there.
So the whole point is just to return to it, everything. Like from the meet again, everything.
To meet again.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea is that really, it's more than just returning, because there's a difference between it returning, having already been a finite object, and then receiving infinity into herself, versus being a finite object inside of it, bottle inside of infinity. Which means there was never like a time when I don't know if I'm making myself clear. I'm speaking words. I'm not sure if they're like going to the
They're
listener.
going somewhere.
I mean, I'm saying things that make sense. I'm just not sure if when they get out there they make sense.
Right.
You have basically. Let's just put it like this. You have the finite worlds inside of an infinite light.
Okay.
Right? That's how they begin. So there's not really finite worlds there. You can't really say that there's something finite sitting inside of there. It's just a theoretical.
Right.
But they are there theoretically. But you lose all the quality of them actually being a real finite world, because they're batal b'metzias.
Okay.
But because they start off in that place, and there is a origin of them there, then even after they'll come out, they can have room for an experience of being batal b'metzias again. So that's the reason why they were made to begin with inside. That's your question. Why didn't he just make Malchus by itself without starting it off like lost in all this light?
No, the question was, why didn't he make Malchus in a way that was always in the light? And it's
always in the light.
Yeah, always in light, and it's a mitzias. Like, why does he have to make it a mitzias that's lacking light?
No,
Why?
because if you make it, I guess the idea is that if it doesn't, there's no such thing as, I mean, Hashem can do anything,
Right.
But there is an advantage. In other words, to be finite and infinite at the same time
Yeah.
is not really a realistic thing unless you've experienced them both independently, right? Because it's not called finite and infinite unless there's such a thing called infinite and there's such a thing called finite, and then you have them at the same time. To begin with, the infinite is swallowing up the finite and not letting it sort of express itself. Right? You can't really have the expression of finite in the place of infinite unless you at least experience what finite is to begin with first. I mean, I suppose you could, Hashem could do anything,
Right.
but it would not have been, it wouldn't have been in the experience of the finite would never have been truly felt unless they actually knew what it meant to be hatched out of in the infinite experience, at least at some point in time.
Okay.
So by Hashem's perspective, okay, there could have been such a duality, but by the perspective of the finite entity, what does it mean for them to be a finite entity if they never experienced a distance from infinite?
Okay. So the reason that Malchus had to get those 5 upper parts sufid away from it was because
To experience finite. Hashem wants a dir b'tachtonim.
Okay.
In a certain sense, you can always ask, why does Hashem wants a dir b'tachtonim? And the
Yeah,
answer to that
that's
is just like he just wants one.
Right.
But if you want a dir b'tachtonim, he has to create a tachtonim. And a tachtonim means a finite light which is not disturbed by the infinite expression.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry, I mean, you got to read the mimer.
Yeah, right.
But that's the idea. If you don't, I mean, trying my best there.
No, I thought it was a good question you asked, but yeah, I'm with you.
All right, so let's get back into our world here.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the difference between tzedakah and chesed. So returning those 5 partsufim, keser, chokhmah, bina, za, and let's say call it panimius of malchus, that is great. It's called tzedakah. You feel the lack of the worlds. The world was created by going into lack, and when Hashem gives it tzedakah, it can feel the lack.
Right.
And what's of note there is that even keser, the one that we're talking about right now, which is the external part of keser, even that is called feeling the lack of malchus. Even keser, which is above the worlds, in this capacity is also part of what the worlds are lacking in their own initial state. Why? Because we're talking about the lower part of keser, arich, and the lower part of keser has already the would-be worlds, the would-be 10 spheros in it, ready to be distributed into Atzilus. It's just they haven't been contracted into an or panimi yet. But they're already shayach to the world. The whole purpose of those 10 spheres of arich is in order to make the 10 spheres of Atzilus. So even before they actually make them b'poel mamish, they're already shayach to the world.
Right.
And therefore, if the worlds don't have them, the worlds are lacking. Because there's something shayach to the worlds.
Right.
It's like a person who's, he's used to having what's shayach to him. If he doesn't have it, he's poor and he needs tzedakah. So even the realm of keser, which is normally above the worlds to some degree, it's still shayach to the worlds and would be lacking if it didn't have it, and therefore giving it to the world is called tzedakah, filling a lack.
That's where it starts.
Right. However, then there's something called chesed, and chesed is when you give something to a person that doesn't even need. It's beyond his requirements, and this is what we call panimius of keser, right? Because atik, that's not one of the 5 partsufim that was removed from the world in order to make it. It was never part of the world. That's what it means. Atik, it means to be removed entirely. And yet, if you'll experience that, that's not called tzedakah to the world. It's called chesed to the world. And that is something which is l'chatchila beyond what the world could ever experience or had experienced to begin with, even in its source. And that's what it means. Chasidecha yivarechuchem. We're talking about the idea of the chassid can bless and give a bracha to malchus. It's called the bracha of chesed mamish, which it means it's able to bring the panimius of keser, the level of atik, down into malchus and bring a sort of light into the world that has never been experienced even in its source. Okay?
Nice.
That's yesterday's class.
Yeah.
So he says in Os Vav, Mamshich ba'maimer. Again, the Rebbe Rashab goes on. This is all sort of a chazar of the Rebbe Rashab, but the Rebbe's Peirushim mixed in. The Yisra b'Gemara, it says in the Gemara, Shetzedakah hi le'aniyim u'gemilus chasadim He bein laniyim bein lashiri. This is a twist and turn, what we said yesterday. And when it comes to tzedakah, right, it says you only, of course, give tzedakah to the poor. It's not shy to give tzedakah to the rich. It's not called tzedakah. You want to spend your tzedakah money wisely and do the mitzvah, you can't give it to a rich person. You're not yotzi. But gemulus chasadim, if you want to give chesed, you could do the mitzvah of giving chesed, whether to rich or poor or rich. Because there is some shaykhs to giving something even to the rich. That's what he's trying to say here. This that it's shaykh to give chesed even to someone who's already rich. Move on. So it comes out that all what we were getting excited about yesterday and just now in the review is not the ultimate level. Because it comes out from here. If you give hashpah to someone who's rich, and that's called chesed, then it must be that whatever is called chesed is even higher than being rich. We were excited because you have poor, you give them tzedakah, and that just fills their lack. And then if you give them more than that, it makes them rich. Right? But now we're saying you can even give to the rich. Which means that just being rich is also not the top level. And on the contrary, this thing we're calling chesed, it's called chesed when you give to the rich. Which means there's something even higher, ultimately, than this pnimius of keser that we had just tapped into. Does everyone grasp that? We just said? Yeah, okay.
Pnimius of keser is shaykh to the world?
No. Pnimius of keser makes the world rich, which means it's going beyond what's shaykh to it.
Oh, okay.
But here's the point: you can gimilus chasadim, giving chesed, is you could also give to the rich.
Okay.
So whatever made you rich, you can even have more.
Right.
Lahayir, and to clarify, the l'chora haya efshar lomar. Seemingly, one might say, dashpasa chesed la'ashir. That what does it really mean to give chesed to the rich? He shemashpim lo ashirus gedol yoser. You might say, okay, just make him more rich. Mashir shahaisa lo mikodim. In other words, what do you mean? How could you give it to the rich? He's rich already. So you just make him more rich, right? In other words, you make him richer than he was before. But Masha Kasuba Maimer Shashposh Mitzad Chesed Hilamayla Madrigas Ashir. So, but it's not really what it says in the Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab. He says giving Gimlus Chasadim to the rich, it's above. It's a type of Chesed goes to the level which is a beyond rich. In other words, there's something called poor, something called filling the needs of the poor, there's something called making them rich, and there's a darga beyond called rich. And that's what it means when you give chesed to the rich, it's coming from a level beyond rich. So it can't just mean making him richer than he was before. Yesh lomar k'shashpa shemashpiim lo. So we want to say that this hashpa that you're going to give him, achshav, hu inyan sheba'archo. This hashpa that you're giving him now is something which is at his general level. This is what it would mean if you just gave the guy a little bit more money, made him a little bit more rich, right? Which we're sort of negating right now, but he's investigating that. What would it mean if giving to the rich just meant making him a little bit more rich? So he's saying if you're going to give him now something which is sort of relative to his scale, you're just upping the ante. He has a $1 billion plane. You're going to buy him a $3 billion plane. It was the news right now.
My counselor.
Right? So it doesn't really work like that. Since before he was the rich guy even was lacking the $3 million plane, right? So it's sort of at his relative scale. It's definitely going to make him richer, and he's definitely already rich. But the fact that you can make him richer, Einu amis is inyan da ashir. It means that this is what he had already was not really the true level of rich. In other words, if he's going to be happy by getting 3 billion when he only had 1, it means that the 1 billion guy was not really the rich guy. He wasn't rich yet. If you can make him richer, then he's not really called rich. So we're talking about a person who literally has everything already. That's what makes him rich. And therefore, giving him more doesn't just mean you're going to give him a few more billion. That's not what it means to give to the rich, because that means to begin with he wasn't truly rich. We're talking about rich to the level where a few more billion is not really going to help this guy. He's mamish rich. Can't really give him anything. So what does it mean to give to the rich then? Therefore he says, the gemulus chasadim la'ashirim, when you give, true concept of giving to the rich, is a hashpash mitzad chesed hilamayla madrigas ashir. It's truly, you go beyond the level of rich. What does it mean? Alavai, we'll know someday. But he says, sug acher lagamri. It's a different breed altogether. In other words, what do you mean? Instead of like giving a $3 billion plane, you give him the World Bank. In other words, it is still a level of money, but it's a scale which is so beyond anything that's relative to him that it's not like he's lacking, any level of richness by not having the World Bank. He can have anything he wants. But this is already something like silly and ridiculous. Like there's no money in the world that is now lacking from him. You go from the level of upping the scale to something which is incomparable and unrelatable to his level of wealth before. That's what it means to give to the rich. It's not just a few extra billion. And why is that truly called giving to the rich? Because this that he didn't have it before. They didn't, right? In other words, this that you give him something which is completely incomparable to where he's presently standing, that's not called the fact that he was lacking in his wealth a moment before. He could be perfectly v'shleimus in his wealth before you gave him the World Bank. And it's not called he was lacking wealth. Because this is just a silly, ridiculous level of new wealth to the point that it's something beyond the level of rich. And that's what it means you can give to the rich. That the rich is already a perfect rich. It's just you're changing the scale of rich to him. And so that's what it means when we start really talking about chesed. So now we're all of a sudden fine-tuning the chasidecha yivarachucha. What this chesed is something really beyond comprehension. It's like the whole World Bank. And who knows how much more. Alright, so that's Osbav. Does everyone get that? You follow?
Does this chesed come from the same source
Ooh.
Of what?
That's a good question.
as the chesed that makes a person rich?
It's the tzedakah.
Wait.
Not tzedakah. Is this chesed that make a rich person richer? That when he was rich, comparable to now he is poor, the same as making Malchus rich when she was just satisfied.
It's hard. There's three levels we're now saying. There's a level of giving to Malchus when she's poor. That's called tzedakah, right? There's a level of giving her beyond, now that she's been satisfied. There's a level of giving her to make her rich. And that we're saying is coming from, the first one came from Arich. This one's coming from Atik, which is called Penimius HaKeser, right? Not make her rich. And if you're going to give to the rich, so that really wasn't called chesed yet. When to make her rich, it was called chesed, but it was really a lower version of chesed. Because the true chesed is you can give to the rich and the poor alike. The poor and the rich alike. So now there's another level of giving to the rich, which is incomparable great, and now that comes from a completely different source. We're going to call that, in a second, we'll see, if there's keser, and then there's penimius HaKeser, which is arich and atik, there's also something called penimius atik. And that's where this level of the chasidecha is really coming from. And in general, it's important to note here, because if we do launch off at some point into learning the kuntres of in Yano Shel Torah Chasidis, remember I told you I wanted to learn that, but I felt like we should learn this first. This is the mimer that was said before that sicha, and that's like sort of the Rebbe's definition of what Chasidis is. He starts off by talking about this level of penimius atik. And I said we can't really just start a sikha by talking about Penimius Atik. Like the Rebbe starts over there, just like, all right, so Hasidus is Penimius Atik. Now let's move on. And it's just, you need to mamash get in there and understand what Penimius Atik really is in a very slow, controlled way before you can go have a whole sikha about it. So now we sort of arrive there to a certain degree, right? We don't really know what it is yet, but there's much more to be said about it. But there's Arich, which is giving tzedakah. There's Atik, which is making rich. And there's penimius atik, which is giving to the rich. That's the true definition of chesed, what the chasidecha yivrachucha. That's where chasidis comes from. Okay? Zion. Bichdei levar inyan chesed shelamayl mashirus. in order to explain this level of chesed which is beyond wealth, Makdim ba'maimer. Again, the Rebbe Rashab prefaces in the Maimer, Bir Inyan Ashirus Shaya b'Yimei Shlomo. He explains what it means to have the wealth of the days of Shlomo, which, according to all accounts, was the Darga Hachi Nailis Sheba Ashirus. It was the highest level of wealth that ever existed in the world. As we said earlier, basically, nothing was withheld from Shlomo whatsoever. And so, if you're going to give to the rich, you have to know what rich is. Rich was Shlomo Hamelech. So he starts to explain what does it mean the wealth of the days of Shlomo Hamelech. Umevarer dezeh shebi mei Shlomo hayakayma siyara bashlemusa. In the days of Shlomo, there was something called the fullness of the moon. Right, the kaima, it stood sihara, the moon, bashlemusa, in its fullness. And of course, what does that mean? Why in the days of Shlomo was there a full moon? Anybody?
It was the 15th generation from
Avraham. Very good. So
So
the 15th generation is the idea of the full moon is at the 15th day.
Oh.
Right? So the Jewish people are compared to the moon.
It's like,
The Jewish people are compared to the moon. So we're growing and growing from our infant state of Avram. Finally it came full in days of Shlomo. What does it mean, the moon? The moon is a reflection of godliness into the world, just like the moon reflects the sun. The moon, which is compared to the Jews, they're opening, allowing Elokus to flow into the world, a reflection of godliness into the world, the Kli which allows it in. It got to its fullest state, its brightest state in Shlomo Hamelech, 15 generations. Nosaf l'zeshenim shachu b'malchus levana sihara. So he says, in addition to the fact that it was drawn into Malchus, which meant, don't forget, Malchus itself is the moon. Malchus is called the Sihara. The Hey Partsufim Shenechsru. So in the days of Shlomo, not only did they have the 5 Partsufim that were lacking in the moon, Nimshach ba gam gilo de Pnimius HaKeser. But it also had, in his days, the revelation of the Pnimius of Keser, the Atik level. So in the days of Shlomo, there was not only Arich, but Atik was shining. There was not only a satisfying, but the world had more than it ever could have imagined. The world was rich. It had more than it had even in its source. Mashirus de Malchus, Knesset Yisrael, and as we've been saying before, the moon is really the Jewish people, which means the Jewish people were shining in a way where we were higher than our source. And from there, Nimshacha Ashirus Muflaga Yisrael Gam Lamata. And because the source of the Jewish souls, which was Knesset Yisrael, Malchus of Atzilus, was getting enriched from a level of Keser Elyon, from Atik, therefore it had a hashpa on us down in our physical bodies, that the Jewish people down in the world were just as rich as they could possibly be. Filthy rich. There was nothing lacking. No one had any lack whatsoever in any area. And not only did they not have lack, they had abundance, every single Jew. Ashirus muflaga bagashmias. They had just an outrageous, outlandish wealth physically. Ad she'ein kesef nechshav yimei Shlomo l'mu'um. It says, Pashat, in the Tanakh, that silver in Shlomo's days was not worth anything. It was like dust on the earth. You weren't handling with gold and a platinum. You didn't have any currency. Vashirus muflaga baruchnias. And of course, with the physical, or on the contrary, with the spiritual came the physical, but they had spiritual abundance as well. And that's what it means in the days of Shlomo, Dafka, Nivna Beis HaMikdash. That's why suddenly they had the Beis HaMikdash. They had the ultimate light. Not only, they had the Beis HaMikdash HaRishon, which had in it all the glory and all the miracles and all the wonder, things which are completely beyond this world altogether. 10 miracles every second. And the revelation of the Mikdash was even a greater revelation, godly revelation than was in Moshe Rabbeinu's Mishkan. Right? In other words, the Mishkan, which is a temporary house, was on its way to its full glory. And finally it achieved its full glory. Lahosif, and to add, this that Shlomo had such a high revelation. It was even before he actually built the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, it wasn't the Beis HaMikdash which accomplished this. The Beis HaMikdash was a result of this. Because it was really Shlomo Hamelech, as we're going to see in a second, that had this. It wasn't. So therefore, everything associated with Shlomo, he was the one responsible. He was the chassid, right? He was the one who was able to bring down the hashpah, and therefore he could build a Beis Hamikdash. He could make the world rich. He could make the moon full. This that it was specifically him who built it. Even though it was already designed, the design of the Mikdash was made through David, but yet he couldn't build it. Why couldn't David build it?
Because he was the 14th generation?
Not only that, in other words, it's because he didn't have the same level as Shlomo Hamelech. It wasn't in his. Trust me, he would have built it if he could. He didn't have the powers of Shlomo. So you could say, the Rebbe would often say about us being the 7th generation, that okay, we just landed in certain generations. You could say it's just our good fortune to be the 7th generation, but it doesn't mean that it's just going to necessarily happen by itself. You have to raise yourself up to a certain avoda and do the work in order to make it happen. So I guess you could say it was a combination of timing, but it was also the man himself. The time was right, but then he was right. He did what he had to do. Kamosha Kasuv, as it says that Shlomo haya ish manucha, v'shalom v'sheket aten al Yisrael biyamav. He was a man of peace. Peace and tranquility, I will give, these are quotes from the Tanakh, peace and tranquility I will give to the Yisrael in his days. And therefore he's going to build a house in my name. This that all the nations, all the non-Jews were nullified to Shlomo. That's why there was, in fact, in his days, peace and tranquility, because there was no enemies. What were they buttled to? They were buttled to him, his Orein Sof. Through him was shining such a light that just nullified all the goyim to this godliness that was shining out of him. And that's what it means. I'm going to put peace and tranquility in his days. His name is going to be Shlomo because he was this conduit to such a divine light. So therefore there was peace in his days, because all the nations were completely made tranquil before such a revelation of God that was coming out of him.
Wow.
It's similar to what we heard from the Bima last Shabbos, right? That all the Chabad Rebbeim, again, like this Indian of the Dur Hashvi, the 7th generation, was it just like a lucky 7? Or was it the Rebbe himself? Because we see all the other Chabad Rebbeim, they were all put in prison. And they all had major conflicts with the government and with the Misnagdim, seemingly almost impenetrable. I mean, they overcame every time, and that was sort of that was their thing. They were like David Hamelech. They had blood on their hands, but they won, right? But the Rebbe didn't have any blood in his hands. Everyone just was quiet. The government wasn't against him. The Misnagdim couldn't lift a finger or do anything. He just ran the show, right? Because he was the Dur Hashvi. Maybe you could just say it was his timing, or maybe it was him. And he also called forth the timing. And it was everything led up to him. Hashem made sure he had good 6 generations lined up before it got to him. The same is true. Same is true. They all came to Shlomo to hear his wisdom. The president and the city councilmen, the priests, and all of them were lining up, literally, to get $1 from Shlomo Hamelech. The true reason why they were flocking in to see Shlomo from all corners of the world, they were not drawn to his wisdom. That's what, Alpi Pashtus. They were drawn to his godliness. It was godly wisdom. They couldn't hold themselves back. They heard there was a God in a certain place. They wanted to go see it. A
person channeling God.
Yeah, I'm saying, but they went to go see the Beis Hamikdash. They heard there's God over there, right? So a building's channeling God, a person's channeling God. God decides he's going to come reside on earth, where he can decide where he wants to put himself. Al derech Mashiach Mashiach, right? And this is what Mashiach, it says by him. Shlomo was almost Mashiach.
What?
What was he?
That's what this whole mimer is about. Because remember, if you recall, what we said is that even perfect wealth, you can give to the wealthy. So he represented the perfection of wealth, which is atik, but not above wealth. So that's Mashiach, as we're going to see, is above wealth.
What will be a little hard to reconcile is that how had so many wives when he was so, and concubines when he was...
That was part of his wealth, right?
Well, but he said that some of them was a disturbance.
Right. No, I'm saying, there's a level beyond, we're talking about, beyond wealth. So in other words, that means in wealth, to some degree, there's some lack. In other words, there's really no lack in the realm of the wealth is perfection. It's not like he could have been more wealthy. But there's some lack in wealth. And that lack in wealth is what made him fall. It made him not be the Mashiach. In other words, it had to come from some natural cause. And it was his wealth itself, that is his abundance in wives, that made it so that it was not, it shows that that's not the shlemus, that's not the totality. You have to go beyond that.
And we're also saying he was physically wealthy, it's just as spiritually wealthy. It wasn't one or the other. It wasn't just like it was just spiritual. It's like both physical, spiritual, like girls, everything, food, gold, everything. It wasn't something he didn't have. He had thousands of concubines.
No, but he's saying, how did he fall? If he,
Right.
because yeah, in other words, he had his downfall was his wives.
Oh.
Because the Torah says that the king is not supposed to increase in wives. David Hamelech had 18,
right?
And you're not allowed to have more than that.
Okay.
So he had 1,000.
Oh, okay.
He had 1,000 wives
Parade.
and concubines.
True.
So,
Right.
so the idea is that he transgressed.
Oh.
But what was his transgression? He said to himself, "Why does it say a king shouldn't have too many wives? Because it's going to make him fall." And he was so wise. This is like a lesson that everyone should learn. He says, "Well, it's not going to make me fall because I'm the wisest man in the world." Right?
It's for other people.
What's that? No,
Right.
maybe he thought that. You're saying that's not a bad call. That's in other words, that's the mistake, because wealth beyond wealth is not 1,000 wives, not even 100,000 wives. It's like you can't count that number. They didn't make that many women yet, right?
I think it's the 500,000 loaves of bread at the meal. That's about the wealth beyond wealth.
To see exactly how many it was, I'm not sure the number, but yeah, I said that yesterday, but I'm not sure exactly how many it was. So anyway, his downfall is his downfall. Whatever, it wasn't the time for Mashiach.
Yeah.
He didn't rise to the next level. But as Mashiach, he had the same quality where it says Naru elav kol goyim. The goyim all float to him like a river. In other words, he had that Mashiach quality, because they were all racing for his godliness, wanted to see this miracle, like they printed in the New York Times. There's a prophet, little Moses in Brooklyn, in the early years. New York Times printed. Everyone wanted to come see the little Moses in Brooklyn. That all that were drawn to him, as we said, they weren't drawn to his wisdom, they weren't drawn to his good looks or his loaves of bread, they were drawn to the godliness. Because the revelation of light that's shown at that time, it drew to him all the sparks that were in those nations. And why would Goyim be drawn to godliness? Because they're also made of God. Everything is made of God. It has a spark of godliness which defines it. It's just that not all things can draw out that spark. Remember, we just had a whole class about Yitzchak wanting to bless Esav, because he was trying to bring such a huge light that it would draw even Esav's hidden spark and make it pop out. So Shlomo was that bracha of Yiten L'cha Elokim. He was like a standing bracha of Yitzchak that made all the little sparks, the little calling inside of every individual on the earth want to, come check this out. It stirred the godliness in them. And of course, this is the same thing, by the way. We're talking about this as a Chassidus. Let's just get to the point here. That's why it's so fundamental to learn Chassidus. Because you can't say for sure that every aspect of Torah is going to have such a loud call to the hidden spark inside of your body, inside of your goy, asher bakir b'cha, that's inside of you, that it's going to make it respond and come to you and call out and respond to your godly soul's interest of serving Hashem. Only a certain very, very powerful light can be so strong that it can call out to the goy in you and make him come into the table. So we're going to see actually this isn't even, Shlomo's not even getting to the level of Chassidus yet. But we can at least use it as an example that what's happening is a sort of call and a deep, permeating the hidden recesses of godliness inside the world. And of course, this is the exact example that we heard by Yitzchak and Esav. B'dugmas avuka shemosheches aleha kol hanitzutz. It's just like a big torch that draws all the little flames that comes near it. Put a candle near a torch, it pops in and flies off the wick. So all the little candles that were burning inside of all the goyim in the world, they popped off and flew to the Beis HaMikdash, to the torch. And literally, they all raced to see him, and it was a metropolis of international happenings because everybody wanted to go check out what's going on in Yerushalayim with Shlomo Hamelech. Yeah,
Queen Sheba.
Kevan. Queen Sheba was is the most classic example because she was the richest kingdom in the world besides Shlomo. Remember, she was like the head of the goyim. When you read history, a period of that time, that's what. If you're not Jewish, you're not reading it from like sort of the true sources. You go to your regular middle school history class, they're going to tell you that was the great empire of the day. It wasn't actually, right? For a short period of time there, Shlomo Hamelech was the great empire of the day. But she was, so to speak, in the eyes of the world. They don't like to tell Jewish history in those books. It's not really their thing. They think they won the war, and the victor gets to tell the story. The war, little they know, is not over yet. But anyway, Kevan Shagilu Sheheir Az. Since the revelation that's shown at that time, it was such a high revelation. Therefore, even the very distant sparks were also drawn. They were also drawn. In other words, very distant kingdoms. What's the idea of distant kingdoms? It's that something is distant begashmias. It also means it's distant baruchnias, which means klippas, which are not particularly interested in hearing the call for godliness. You have klippa, you have klippas noga, you have three gimel klippas, right? You have your three klippas atameis, which means that as you go lower and lower into the lower levels of klippas, some of them are just not going to be called so fast, right? And the further people are away from the Holy Land, it means the further their klippa is hidden from godliness. And yet even very distant nations he was able to bring here because of the power of his godliness. K'moshe Kasuv, and this is, I guess, her Indian, Malchus Shva, the Queen Sheba, Shamas es Shema Shlomo l'Shem Hashem. And it says she heard the fame of Shlomo and the name of God. So what is it? She didn't hear just a popular rock star. She heard that there was the name of God over there. V'tavo Yerushalayma, and therefore she came to Jerusalem.
What's Shamas mean?
Shamas is heard.
Right?
She heard the fame of Shlomo. Ches. Hine. This that Shlomo was a man of peace, as we said. And that's the whole Indian we said, that he was a man of peace, meaning he had a godliness which was enough to subdue the whole world, to not be an antagonist.
How do you get to this level? What do you do exactly to get there?
He was a chassid.
Just saying Shema on time and just just normal avoda.
No, not normal avoda.
Get stocks.
Like you can say, what did Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai do? What did Moshe Rabbeinu do? Certainly, they were born with special kochos, but it wasn't just the special kochos. It was the usage of those special kochos. They fulfilled, like what did Avram Avinu do? Baba Yami. He fulfilled every single one of his days. I mean, he's a perfect man. I mean, we can strive. It says we should ask ourselves, when are my deeds going to reach the deeds of my forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov?
That's a good question.
But it's certainly not. They weren't taking days off, and they weren't taking even seconds off of the avoda. Anyway, so this that he was a man of peace. Habiro shabi amav hayabederech manucha. So this is a whole new turn in the mimer. That the refinement of the world that happened in his days was called a derech manucha. He refined the world in a way of peace. We also heard this from the Bima on Shabbos, this concept. In other words, why is this mimer called Pada B'Shalom Nafshi? Right? It's because my soul was redeemed in peace, as opposed to my soul being redeemed from war, in war. right? In other words, you could be in a conflict and you can get out of it by fighting, or you don't have to get out. You can get out of it by peace. So, as we said, the Alter was reading the words "Parav Shalom Nafshi," and he was just released. All of a sudden, the whole bad guys went away, and he came out. So, this is the same Shlomo Hamelech. He was called a man of peace because the way he refined the world was in peace. Shelo hayat tzorich l'milchama. He didn't need to fight. Bichdei levaras hanitzutzos. He didn't need to go out and fight like his father did. Right? His father had to go warring with the whole world in order to sort of secure Eretz Yisrael and make the godliness obey. Come to be. But Shlomo didn't have to pick up any weapons. All the godliness just came to him so he could refine them. How did he refine them, by the way? He married them. That was one of the things. His wives, he was up to something. It wasn't just big time. He was up to something, and he was a tzaddik gomer in every single thing he did. So the whole idea of marrying all these women were not just stam women. They were the princesses of every nation. So he was basically taking the power of those nations and marrying them to the Jewish cause. So they didn't have to go find them and go to their place and go courting them. They came to him. The sparks came to him, and he married them. He refined them.
They were idol worshippers, and they even had idols on them, right? So, and they didn't.
No, it's not so. It's not so clear, right? First of all, there was one that came from the house of Paro, right? And she did convert to Judaism. And she didn't have idols hanging around her, so to speak. But she converted for the wrong reasons. She converted for the sake of marriage. In other words, it's told, oftentimes you see this, that like the very, very, very refined, so to speak, sin of the tzaddikim, Alpi Nigla, they didn't sin at all. Like David HaMelech, right? He sent this guy out to go be killed so that he could marry his wife. But it was all kosher in a certain sense. Like he didn't do any averas, Alpi Torah. Right? It was just like something could have been done a little bit more smoother in a panemiistic way. So it's the same thing. Shlomo married this woman, and she converted to Judaism and everything. She's probably a frum lady, right? But it says over there that she was an idol worshiper, and he married an idol worshiper because it's trying to highlight that it was not that there was something wrong here. But it's not like it's not as bad as it sounds. It's just that because she converted for the wrong reason, it was not a proper conversion. And therefore, she wasn't really Jewish, and she did have these sort of these tremendous lackings. But in other words, there was a flaw in Shlomo. It didn't go all the way. If it would have been Mashiach. But you can't just start knocking the whole picture down. But nonetheless, even there, why was he marrying her? Because he was trying to. That would have been the ultimate, right? To take an Egyptian woman. Egypt means the ultimate level of confinement and gavul limitations, and even there to convert it to Judaism, that would have been Mashiach. Okay, it couldn't happen. He tried. They pushed for it. We want Mashiach now. He did what he could. So anyway, they came. He didn't have to go out and fight. They came, and he refined them. It was primarily because of the revelation that was in the Beis Hamikdash, which we already said was really through him. Now he's saying that what Moshe had was listen, if it was a good enough class, you couldn't leave. You would draw all the sparks over here. But I get you. Sometimes there's a bas paro. What can you do?
It's our flaw.
It's definitely, we're trying to build a Beis Hamikdash, but it depends on the Shlomo. Okay, so he's saying that the Giloi, now he's going to discuss the difference between the Mikdash and the Mishkan. Right? Because what was really drawing all these souls to Shlomo was the power of the Mikdash. Okay, it was the power of Shlomo, but he turned his power into a Mikdash. Whereas the revelation, the refinement that took place during the times of the Mishkan, which means the godly level which was residing in the Mishkan, including the Aron HaKodesh that was in the Mishkan, it was God's dwelling place, even in there. The whole thing was a warfare type of procedure. Right? The Mishkan was at war. Whereas the refinement that took place through the temple was in a way of peace. Where do we see that this is the case with the Mishkan and the Mikdash? As it says in the Zohar, Train inun habu da amru Kuma Hashem. There was two there were, that said the words Kuma Hashem, rise up Hashem. Moshe and David, they both said the words Kuma Hashem. Moshe and David. Moshe said Kuma Hashem v'yafutz oivecha. Right? We said this when we opened the ark. Moshe said, rise Hashem and scatter your enemies. David amar Kuma Hashem limnuchasecha. And David in Tehillim, he says, rise up Hashem to your peace. So Moshe says, rise up to scatter your enemies. Moshe says, rise up to your peace. David says, rise up to your peace.
Now, for the Mishkan, could be that for fighting, the scorpion, the snakes, and Nounsborough level. Is that for fighting? Right? Certainly.
And he explains again the Rashab and the Maimer that this is the Mishkan and the Aron that was in it. It was going around in the desert in order to nullify the klippas in the midbar, which was what the Nachashim, Srafim, V'Akravim was, the snakes and the scorpions. So where was the Mishkan doing its avoda? In the terrain of the enemy. And it was traveling around also in the terrain of the enemy. It had to go on the whole tircha of being in battle. Right? There's a snake over there, we're going to go get him. There's a mountain over there, we have to go level it. There's a desert over here, we have to go bring it to flourish like a forest. Right? Everywhere the Mishkan went, it turned the desert into like a blooming land. So it was fighting though. It was going after its enemies everywhere. And it says in Svarim that because the klippas in the world were so intense that before they did that, that was not stam a thing that happened. It was those 42 journeys. It says every man in his life goes on those 42 journeys, right? That they stopped in the desert, because those 42 journeys was like a klalis dika avoda that had to happen before any sort of entrance to Eretz Yisrael, any real avoda could happen with anyone. Moses had to go into the desert and get the real klippas. That desert was a manifestation of pure evil, and so they had to go fight with it and get their hands dirty, tackling those 42 journeys. But Pashtus, they had to do it. They had to fight the enemy. They had to go out and refine the sparks of Kedusha that fell there. And that's called Birur B'derech Milchama. That's what we call refining by way of war.
Right. Shliach.
It's not so clear, Shliach. It's interestingly. We're going to see. But an analogy for this is davening. Oh. When you daven, right, it says that, right, Shas Tzlosa, Shas Krava. Right, the time of davening is called a time of war. That's one of the reasons why we wear a gartel when we go davening. Because you're girding your loins, getting ready for the fight, right? And you put on your tefillin, and you put on your talis, and you're basically all geared up for the battle, right? Because why is it called fighting? Because you're really taking your nefesh habahamis by the horns at that time, right? You're gonna try and clear it of all negative thoughts, and you're. It's not like you're learning Torah where you're you're entertaining yourself, right, with interesting information. Right. You're reading the same thing you read yesterday and the day before. You're just trying to have deep kavana and just clear the land of all negative thoughts, so you can meditate on the oneness of Hashem. So you're and look what you're doing. Also, you're taking your body, and it's not allowed to talk, and you have to keep it still, right? And you have to sit in one place, and so you're basically controlling the behema mamish. You're taking it's called like a sacrifice, right? You're putting it on the altar and you're burning it up. So this is a direct fight against the nefesh habahamis. So this is like an example of davening. Anyway, it's called birur b'derech milchama. Kuma Melech sheyotzim makomo, and this is what we'll get into tomorrow. Shkoya. Here, pass in the sheets if you don't want to hold on to them. There's much in there than yesterday.
You think what Shlomo was trying to do was kind of like what's been happening for the time? It's the Jewish people went to different countries and stuff, and they had to gather all their sparks and then bring it to Israel. And now, for Shlomo, that didn't happen before. Everyone was just in Israel. And so him marrying all these different people, he was trying to do what time did now and speed it up by just marrying princesses from all these different places.
Totally. He didn't. But the point is not just that time did it. Time didn't accomplish what he did. He didn't have to go, like the fact that we had to have the temple be destroyed, and then we had to go back into the world and fight with it to get those sparks. We're saying that he was on such a high level, he didn't have to fight with it. The sparks came to him. Right? So because he was on a higher level where he forced the sparks out from their place to his place, as opposed to us having to go from our place to their place. So we lost that level. In other words, we attained the level of Atik in the world, like this level of Chesed, for a short period of time, and then we lost it. So we have to go back and start over again. We'll return it in the days of Mashiach, even a higher level.
Yeah, I feel like...
Because that's kind of what's happening now, right? We're back. Like we're mamash back in Eretz Yisrael. It's a real thing. There's wealth, there's commerce, there's sparks coming to us. I mean, it's just a fact of the matter. But Gashmias, people are bringing their schura to Eretz Yisrael. We don't have to go schlepping in their lands, you know. And the Jews that are out there, you know, they're sending money here. It's like it's all building mamish the God's domain in the world. It's really happening. Man. Open your eyes and you'll see the Mashiach is here.
I learned this last year.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that the kuda from yesterday. I never got that.
Which Nakuda?
That we, it's a mushroom for us.
Right.
That we're Malchus Shema Malchus.
Right.
We're like the Pasternak. And then if we can trigger the higher realms of Hashem's midos in us.
Totally.
If we have the right avoda.
Right.
Who's his buddy?
I never got that. That was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the cool thing, like these, like there's so much in there, you know,
I know.
because we go so fast.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that.
There's so many huge points that we're just like, you know.
Especially this mime. I don't always do the same mime
like,
over and over again a year
You
after
can
year.
do another. You can do the same over again. And be like, whoa, there's so many aspects to that. You're like, I totally didn't get at all.
Think how many times we learn Tanya in our life, just over and over and over and over.
Right, and I still don't get it half the time.
And you know, I had a friend say to me yesterday about like, you know, like now, like, you know, the United Nations is really drunk right now. You could actually get rid of